I'm here as an invited guest. So the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization, and we do not support any candidates or political parties, but we do take positions on issues. And the abolition of the Electoral College position was adopted at the national level by our organization in 1970. And in that year, an amendment almost made it through both houses of Congress and almost made it to where the states had to decide. So this is a long-held position of the League. And so this is an educational program we're going to give to you today. And it's a scripted presentation because the idea is we would like to encourage as many people as possible to take this presentation and give it to other groups that you belong to. And the script is right there, and I'll just read it directly so you'll see how it is. So Joyce and Kaylee, while I'm doing this, I'm going to let you admit people from now on, okay? And I'm going to share and start the presentation. Okay, my thing here. All right, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League is a natural home for the movement to abolish the Electoral College because the League is about making democracy work better for everyone. The League is specifically and proudly nonpartisan, which means that it can work to improve our democracy without partisan rancor and can help unite people around a common purpose. It has national reach and a trusted voice, as well as over 500 local leagues across the nation that are comprised of citizens like us working to improve our democracy. The League of Women Voters recommends many changes to our election system that would increase fair and representative participation in our democracy, from issues such as voter information and registration to candidate selection and election procedures. Today, we'll talk about how the Electoral College damages our democracy and how the League is working to abolish it in favor of a direct popular vote for electing the president and vice president. They adopted this position in 1970 and most recently updated it in 2010. First, let's talk about where the Electoral College comes from. Why did the framers of the Constitution create the Electoral College? This is a discussion which could and has taken up several book chapters. I'll try to distill it down to its essential elements as understood by scholars who have tried to answer this question. The framers' most important consideration was that they wanted to limit the potential for corruption and concentration of power and to maintain independence between the executive and legislative branches. Therefore, they wanted a method other than having Congress select the president, which was the method originally suggested by the delegates. So why not just elect the president directly by the people? Some of the Constitution's framers worried that long distances and lack of communication would make the people ill-informed about the candidates and unlikely to choose the best person. They worried that people could be easily misled by a few designing men or would simply vote for the candidate from their own state. They wanted some kind of intermediary system. It's worth noting that very few of the framers were worried about angry mobs hijacking the selection of the president. The worries were more about how a vast population spread over a large country would be able to make an informed choice. There was some element of the ongoing tension between northern and southern states as well. Slaveholding states did not want direct election because they wanted their enslaved people to count as 3/5 of a person in determining the number of electors the state received. Remember that this was the arithmetic used to determine their numbers in the House of Representatives. So having the elector system artificially boosted the voting representation of slaveholding states, just as in Congress. Whereas a direct popular vote would only count the number of people who could vote, which of course did not include enslaved persons. In fact, evidence suggests that there was a lot of discussion, confusion, and changing of minds during the process of figuring out the election system. It was one of the last issues discussed at the exhausting, long, hot, contentious convention, and fatigue and impatience may well have played a role in its adoption. It had broad but unenthusiastic support and seemed like the best they could do at the time. The second choice of many, but the first choice of few, with little idea of how it would play out in reality. One historian has called it a jerry-rigged improvisation. Most of the framers did intend for the selection of the president to be based on the popular wishes of the citizenry, with the elector system as an intermediary system intended to breach the difficulties of distance and communication. James Madison considered the elector system to be the next best thing to direct selection, saying that the president is indirectly derived from the choice of the people. However, there is some evidence that they also expected the electors to exercise their own discretion in the selection of the president as a bulwark against corruption, bias, or misinformation. But the electors have almost always acted as a rubber stamp on the votes of the people, with very few exceptions. In those instances where an elector has voted differently than the state's voters dictated, they have generally met with a great deal of protest and anger, which is to say, the people expect the electors to be a rubber stamp on the will of the people and have never been interested in them exercising their own discretion. Notice that none of the founders' original concerns remain relevant today. Citizens are quite able to become informed about the candidates no matter where they live. The framers' concern about the corruption and concentration of power that would come if Congress selected the president is still valid, but no one is proposing that we move to this system. And any notion that we might need electors to exercise their own discretion to overturn a so-called poor decision by the people has just not been borne out over time. The people don't want this, and the electors have rarely done it. So in looking at how the Electoral College came about, it is clear that this is not a foundational text of our Constitution that should not or cannot be changed. It is an imperfect system that tried to address concerns of the framers at the time. Just as we have changed our system of electing the vice president and senators, we can also change our system of electing the president if we think it's necessary to improve our democracy. And there's ample evidence that this system is directly damaging to our democracy and does, in fact, need to be changed. Why does the League of Women Voters take the position to abolish the Electoral College? It's really very simple. It comes down to the concept of one person, one vote. The unintended result of the Electoral College is to put the choice of president and vice president in the hands of voters in only a few so-called battleground states or swing states. I don't have to tell you the names of these states because we are all very, very familiar with them. They are 4 of our well-known swing states, and they are among the 19 states that received all campaign visits from the 2 presidential candidates in 2008. The other 31 states received not a single presidential campaign visit. Well, you might ask, so what? In an age of television and smartphones, we can easily watch the candidates' speeches no matter where they make them, and we can get the highlights from any of a number of news outlets. True, but the problems with this system go well beyond our ability to hear what the candidates have to say. Part of the League's core mission is to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. As such, perhaps the most disturbing aspect, especially for us League members, of the Electoral College system is that it creates a disincentive to vote for citizens living in non-battleground states, which is the majority of people in our country. If you live in Illinois or Mississippi, why should you bother going out on a cold or a rainy day to vote when you know your state is going to go blue or red anyway? The data from 2016 bear this out. In the graph, you can see that the percentage of eligible voters who cast a vote for president was significantly lower in non-swing states compared to the swing states. The Electoral College decreases participation in our democracy. This is bad for democracy. And this focus on swing states carries over into policy. For example, a study of trade policy found that industries employing large number of voters in swing states were more likely to receive trade-related protection from the federal government compared to industries concentrated in non-swing states. One can ask what other policy decisions might be influenced by whether the affected states are swing states. Think about climate change, for example. Another significant negative effect of the Electoral College system is that it polarizes our electorate and exaggerates our sense of being a divided nation, a nation of red versus blue. Did you know that in Alabama in 2016, 35% of voters chose Hillary Clinton, or that 32% of California voters chose Donald Trump? That is a lot of people, not a fringe minority, but a significant portion of the populations of those states. And these are two solidly red or blue states. What about Colorado, where 43% of voters went for Trump? Or Georgia, where 46% went for Clinton? Doesn't matter. You look at this map and all you see is red and blue, right and left, black and white. There are no centrists. There is no complicated middle ground. There is no reason to even talk to people in those other states because they are just too different from me. Their views are too extreme. This map, with which we have all become so familiar, is extremely damaging to our national unity and our ability to see the great variety of public opinions that exist everywhere and that deserve to be heard. Indeed, they need to be heard, as diverse opinions are as critical to democracy as the vote itself. Without the Electoral College, we wouldn't have to see our election results through this distorted lens. What if the election results simply looked like this? Two numbers, both very large, even in the most lopsided of elections, of victories. Remember Ronald Reagan versus Walter Mondale in 1984? You may remember it as the most lopsided Electoral College victory in modern history, which it was. But you probably don't remember that more than 37 million people voted for Mondale, 41% of voters. That is not a trivial number, and it highlights the way the Electoral College simply erases the diversity of opinion in our democracy. Because when we see it through the Electoral College, almost all of those so-called blue votes are utterly forgotten, erased. Where did all of those Mondale voters go? They're just gone. They don't exist. All we see is 525 to 13, the Electoral College outcome. If we began to see election results like this, might we begin to see ourselves as part of a unified democracy, choosing our leader together, no matter where we live? Might we become more open to diverse, complicated opinions among our neighbors and fellow citizens, more willing to live among people who disagree with us? Imagine if, instead of seeing ourselves as red or blue, we simply saw ourselves as Americans. The results in two recent elections point us, of course, to another serious problem with the Electoral College, which is that it can lead to a presidential winner who did not receive the majority of the votes. This has happened 5 times in our history, and it's the main reason most people find the Electoral College troubling. You may have heard somebody say, well, yes, all of this is true, But here's why the Electoral College still makes sense. We'd like to walk through the most common myths and misperceptions about what the Electoral College does and does not accomplish, what it was meant to do, and how it's impacting our democracy. These are not just fringe theories, by the way, but these are the main points that supporters of the Electoral College use to defend this antiquated system, and none of them stands up under scrutiny. Myth number one. Without the Electoral College, our presidents would all be chosen by a couple of big states like California, New York, and Texas. Let's run through the numbers to see how it would actually play out in an election by national popular vote. Now, let's say, for the sake of this example, that every state in the union voted 60% to 40% for the same candidate. An absolute landslide, an unbelievably strong preference for one candidate. Let's see how many states it would take to get us up to 50% if we elected the president by the national popular vote total, going in order from the largest states down to the smallest. California has the most voters, and 60% of its voters would represent 7% of the national total. Next is Texas, so we'll add that to the total. Remember, in this example, we have 60% of voters choosing the same candidate in every state. So we're seeing how long it would take for that candidate to get up to 50% of the votes. Now we'll add Florida. Here's New York. Now we add Pennsylvania. Now Illinois, and we're not even halfway there. Let's add a half dozen more states and see where we get. In fact, it would take the votes of 27 states to get us up to 50%, even in this incredibly lopsided scenario. In reality, of course, California and Texas might go for different candidates, in essence, canceling each other out. And the margins of victory would likely be much smaller in many of these states, which means that it would take even more states' voters to get us up to 50%. And you can do this same exercise for cities, by the way. The 10 largest cities in the country only make up about 10% of the vote. If the largest 100 cities all voted unanimously for the same candidate, it would still only get us to 30% of the vote total, nowhere near half. And this top 100 list includes cities like Laredo, Texas, and Spokane, Washington. These are cities with populations in the 200,000s. So that was a theoretical answer to the myth that a few large states would be enough to win the popular vote. Now let's look at the actual election results. Here's the 2012 election results by state for Barack Obama, starting again with the largest state over on the left, you see California there, and adding the vote totals cumulatively for each state. And you can see up here to the green bar that the votes from 39 states, that's the popular votes, were needed to get him the 63 million votes needed to win the popular vote. That is a large majority of states. It is simply mathematically impossible. Let's see. It is simply mathematically impossible for an election by popular vote to be determined by just the largest states or the largest cities. The fact is that direct election by popular vote would ensure that every person is equally represented regardless of where they live. Voters from swing states would count just the same as voters from non-swing states. Voters from the city would count just the same as voters from the country. A California Republican's vote would count just the same as a California Democrat's. Let's look specifically at California, where the presidential vote is split just as it is in all states. 32% of California voters went for Donald Trump in 2016. Once the state's votes were totaled, all 4.5 million of those Trump votes were erased. Why should only a portion of the state's votes count in choosing the president of all the people? In a national popular vote system, those votes would be added to the national total along with the votes from all other states, regardless of who got the most in each state, and regardless of whether that state is big or small. The fact is, we would no longer be voting by state, but by person. So a California voter would get no more say in our election for president than a voter from Mississippi, Rhode Island, Kansas, or any other state. This is what the framers intended when they unanimously agreed with James Madison's statement that the president is to act for the people, not for the states. Myth number two. Oh, I think I did a double. Myth number two. Smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure their interests are represented by the president. Well, the fact is, there is no coherent small state or large state interest, and we're talking about populations now, that needs protecting by the Electoral College. Even the smallest populated state has substantial diversity within it. And it is a fallacy to suggest that when a state goes red or blue, that this represents the interests of the entire state. The concerns of a farmer are likely to be very different than those of a computer programmer, whether they live in New Hampshire, Nebraska, or any other small state. Small states represent a great diversity of economic interests, and they share many of these interests with the larger populated states. For example, agriculture. Most farmers live in states with large populations, such as Texas, Florida, California, and Illinois, and they share economic interests with farmers from smaller states all over the country. The great political battles of American history have been fought between opposing ideologies or economic interests, not between large states and small states. There is no coherent small state interest that needs protecting by the Electoral College. The representatives of small states do not vote as a bloc in Congress, and their citizens do not vote as a bloc for president. The numbers from the 2016 election show this emphatically. The smallest 1/3 of the states, those with fewer than 6 electoral votes, did not all go for the same candidate. In fact, they were exactly evenly split, with 8 going for Clinton and 8 going for Trump. Small states do not vote as a bloc, and they do not benefit from the Electoral College. In fact, smaller states are routinely ignored by presidential candidates under the current system, both as candidates and as presidents. As I mentioned earlier, swing states are the ones that receive the vast majority of attention from candidates, and swing state interests are more heavily reflected in our laws and policies than are the interests of small states, large states, red states, or blue states, especially in election years. So there is no basis for the myth that smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure their interests are represented by the president. And in fact, the Electoral College actually diminishes the rightful representation of the residents of the larger states. For example, Virginia's population is almost 9 times that of larger than Delaware. Okay, now, if you have a good spatial memory, keep that image in your head. We'll go to the next slide. But it only gets about 4 times as many electors because electors are based on the number of senators and representatives from each state. Is this fair? And to make it a little concretely, so every state gets the number of representatives they have in Congress, which is not exactly proportional anyway by itself. And then they get 2 more to represent the senators. So Wyoming has such a small population, they only have 1 representative in Congress. California has, so that's 1 elector for Wyoming, and California has 55 electors, so 53 representatives in Congress. Now, if you add 2 more to California, it brings them from 53 to 55. That's not such a big percentage difference. It doesn't impact their population so much, But in Wyoming, you go from 1 to 3. Now you've got 3 times as much representation as you had originally. And that's where those extra 2 votes make a big difference. Myth number 3, the Electoral College protects the rights of the minority from the tyranny of the majority. Protecting minority rights is a critical part of democratic societies, and the founding fathers designed our government accordingly. As a result, 2 of our 3 branches of government are designed to ensure the protection of minority rights. The first is the courts. Their role is to ensure the constitutional rights of the individual, regardless of the opinion of the majority of citizens. The second is the Senate, in which every state, regardless of population size, gets 2 representatives. This ensures that Wyoming gets heard just as loudly as New York, even though more people live in New York. We do not protect a minority by giving them outsized political power. We protect the rights of minority groups and individuals through our Constitution's Bill of Rights, our courts, and our laws. Our votes should all count equally. The president is supposed to represent the interests of all Americans as fairly and equally as possible. That means 1 person, 1 vote. Myth number 4. Abolishing the Electoral College will mostly benefit Democratic candidates. Modern analysis shows that in 1960, Republican Richard Nixon actually won the popular vote by about 48,000 votes over Democrat John Kennedy. This is the Electoral College map for the 2004 election, where George Bush won over John Kerry with 3 million more votes. So this is the actual map of the time. Now, take a look at Ohio. If, in this imaginary scenario, if Kerry had received only 60,000 more votes in Ohio, he would have won the Electoral College and thus the election, even though Bush would still have had nearly 3 million more popular votes. So this was a near miss for the Republicans, and it sure would make our presentation a lot easier to have an example like this, but they got by on this one. But it came very, very close. And on a more personal level, what about the Republican voter in so-called blue Vermont, or the Democrat voter in so-called red Kansas? Neither of these voters feels that their vote for president counts. This is a disincentive for them to vote, and this is bad for democracy. The system can and has affected both parties. This is a nonpartisan issue. So, how do we abolish the Electoral College? The League of Women Voters supports a constitutional amendment that would replace the Electoral College with direct election of the president. In theory, it's quite simple. Congress passes an amendment by a 2/3 majority in both houses, and then it goes to the states, and 3/4 of the states, which is currently 38 states, have to ratify it. Now, getting to a constitutional amendment will nevertheless take time. It's not going to happen this year. The League of Women Voters is currently focusing on what we're doing today, which is starting discussions about where the Electoral College comes from and how it's bad for our democracy. And perhaps more importantly, we want people to understand that passing a constitutional amendment is possible and can happen. Many of us probably think that ratifying new amendments is a thing of the past, something for a bygone era of political unity, a quaint anachronism. Well, here's a timeline showing the dates that all amendments after the Bill of Rights were ratified. You can see that our history includes flurries of constitutional activity, punctuated by long periods of inactivity. There was a period of 60 years between the first 2 clumps, then another gap of 43, then 18 years between the amendments of the 1930s and 50s and 60s. then a gap of 21 years until our most recent amendment was passed in 1992. What distinguishes these periods of constitutional activity? They tended to be periods of great national political activity, where the citizens were feeling that our democracy was in crisis, where the demand for change across our society was persistent and loud. There was the period after the Civil War, the progressive era of the turn of the last century, and the civil rights era in the 50s and 60s. We are in the middle of another period of political activity, of demand for change. Only time will tell, but the level of activity we are seeing now and the genuine concerns about the resiliency of our democracy are remarkable. In fact, we may be on the verge of adding a 28th Amendment to the Constitution. The Equal Rights Amendment has now passed the needed number of states, but there had been a time deadline put on the ratification, and so that is now in Congress being addressed. So we're hoping that it won't be long before the Equal Rights Amendment passes and gives women the same rights as everyone else in our country. Because of the long time frame expected for an amendment to pass and be ratified, the League also supports an interim measure which would effectively nullify the Electoral College and result in the election of the president by the popular vote, while we continue working on long-term constitutional amendment. This measure is called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and it would guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes in all 50 states and the District of Columbia combined. So we're not going to dwell on this because this organization that Alan and Kaylee are talking about today is basically talking about an amendment, but we'd be happy to answer questions about this in the future. One reform that the League specifically rejects is the voting by electors based on proportional representation. And this is a suggestion that has been made by many in lieu of the present winner-takes-all method. The Constitution says that states are free to assign their electors however they see fit, and winner-take-all is not the only option. Currently, Maine and Nebraska assign their electors proportionate to the candidates' vote by district, and then the 2 extra are done at large. So suppose we did go to a truly proportional system, which neither of those states actually have. But the problem with a proportional system is that it's actually fairly likely that no candidate would receive the 270 electoral vote majority needed to win. This, according to the Constitution, and we forget about this, would send the election of the president to the House of Representatives. So if no one gets a majority of the electoral votes, then it goes to Congress, to the House, and each state, regardless of population, receives 1 vote, and then they vote on who should be president. This would remove the election of the president from the will of the people and would be in direct contrast to the intent of the framers of the Constitution. So if no one got a majority of electoral votes and it went to the House of Representatives, the entire delegation of New York gets 1 vote. The entire delegation of Illinois gets 1 vote. That guy in Wyoming gets 1 vote. You're probably scratching your head trying to figure out why this system would make it why a proportional system would make it unlikely that a candidate would receive 270 votes. The reason is we have always had more than just 2 parties running for president. There are 3rd parties, 4th parties, and beyond. In the 2016 election, votes were actually cast for 31 different candidates, plus a none of the above in a few states. Let's run through a quick example with the 1968 election, a closely fought contest between Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, and George Wallace, who was an unusually strong 3rd-party candidate. Here you can see in the first column on the left that Nixon won the popular vote by a thin margin, but easily in the second column received the required 270 electoral votes under the winner-take-all system. What if electoral votes were allocated based on the percentage of popular vote by state? So starting with Kansas, Nixon would have received 4 electoral votes instead of all 7. So here's the popular vote, the winner take all, and then if it were proportional, now you're dividing up those electoral votes by the population. In Illinois, Nixon would have received 12 instead of 26. In Florida, 6 of 14, as you can see, Wallace and Humphrey are picking off votes, electoral votes, bit by bit in each state. When you do this for all 50 states, now we have a third column. The results of proportional allocation using the 1968 statistics would have been that there was no winner in the Electoral College. Nixon would have failed to achieve the required 270 votes, so the election of the president would have been turned over to the House of Representatives with 1 vote per state and none for Washington, D.C. The simplest, most permanent solution. So this proportional voting has a big flaw as long as you maintain the Electoral College system. The simplest, most permanent solution is to elect the president by direct vote by all citizens of the United States. 1 person, 1 vote. Abolishing the Electoral College would be a common sense solution to update a system that most Americans agree is utterly out of date, confusing, and downright silly. It's time to start building the momentum that will once and for all abolish this dysfunctional system of electing our president. This may seem like a daunting task, but remember, we've amended the Constitution to change the way we elect senators. Remember, they used to be chosen by the legislature, and now they're chosen by the people at large in the state. We've imposed term limits on the presidency. So now he only has 2, depending when he comes in, terms. Remember, Roosevelt had 4. We're including Washington, D.C. in the election of the president, and we're hoping to make more reforms for Washington, D.C. We've eliminated the poll tax, and we've changed the voting age to 18. All these are amendments that affect the way we elect our representatives in Washington. There's no reason we cannot abolish the Electoral College if we decide to do so. So let's get to work. And there you go. Thank you. So that's the script. I offer it to anyone who wants to use it for a group of their own. And I'm assuming we might have a few questions, and Kaylee is going to maybe ask some questions.
Yes, thank you. I am not sure if many questions came in, but I'll have Kaylee go through the short list of questions, or if there are more questions, certainly feel free to type them into the chat box. And I am remiss at the top of the hour, I should have introduced Kaylee Dancer. Kaylee is coming in from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I consider her also my partner in crime and one of our founding members of our nascent group. So thank you, Kaylee. And why not you go through the question or questions?
It looks like we just have one question asking about the compact. And wouldn't it be easier to get that passed rather than the constitutional amendment?
Well, Joyce, do you want to go first, or you want me to go first? I'll let Joyce start on that. She loves to
Hi, I'm Joyce Williams.
Joyce Williams is also from the League of Women Voters of Illinois and comes from the LaGrange League. So yes. Thank you, Joyce. Yeah.
Oh, sure. So we've had that question a lot. And it depends on how you view what's easy and what's hard. So for me, though, I will say that yes, amending the Constitution may not seem like it's that easy. However, it shouldn't be easy. I think a change as important as this, should be something you think about long and hard. So, we're not really looking at it through the filter of what's easy and what's hard, because frankly, the league takes on a lot of hard issues. And so that doesn't scare us, that some people think that it would be harder. Do you want to add to that, Rosemary?
Well, without going into too much detail, the compact is not permanent for one thing. So after one election, states are free to drop out of it. You know, it's within a certain amount of time between elections. So you could be constantly having to re-establish it. Whereas once an amendment is established, then that's it pretty much until someone is
Yeah.
able to pass another one.
And I would just piggyback on that. I think the route that we choose, although it's a very uphill battle and certainly very time consuming, it is a more durable solution. This interstate compact, it would still maintain the Electoral College as a mechanism. That doesn't go away. It's just a way to sort of circumvent the system. And the idea is to sign up states. I think there are 15 states plus DC who have now voluntarily signed on to this over the course of 20 years. Collectively, they have 196 electoral votes among them. And so the magic number, of course, is to sign up enough states to get to that threshold of 270. Again, it is a mechanism. Our official position here at the national vote is that we are supportive of that mechanism. However, our marching orders are to focus on an amendment, which again would be the more durable, permanent, and we think the proper remedy to fix this old system. So thanks, guys. Thanks, Joyce and Rosemary. So Kaylee, back to you.
Yep. I was also going to add to that with the interstate compact, if the states are forced to go with the national popular vote, that would make a lot of people angry. For example, in Texas, if the national vote winner is a Democrat, all the Texas votes don't matter. So I think that would still, make some people angry, and it'd still be unfair. And same with California and a Republican winning the national vote. So,
Under the compact, you mean?
yeah, under the compact. Yeah, the constitutional amendment would make it permanent. The next question was, what is exactly the next step in the process of getting this adopted?
Well, I could take a first stab, and then I'll certainly invite either Rosemary or Joyce to layer on top if I misstate anything. But typically, all the 27 amendments to the U.S. Constitution have had their genesis in the U.S. Congress. So typically, a bill is introduced, and it then goes through its lifespan of going from subcommittee to committee to a floor vote, and it goes along that process. And then, as Rosemary stated, both the houses then have to vote on the bill. You need 2/3 in each house, and then it goes out to the states. And then 3/4 of the state legislatures need to vote on it. Now, in every congressional 2-year cycle, there is at least one bill that gets introduced to eliminate the Electoral College and replace it with the direct vote for president and vice president. And indeed, we are now at the threshold of a brand new 2-year Congress. They were just sworn in on January 3rd, as you all know. And we actually do have one congressman. His name is Steve Cohen. He is a Democrat representing the Tennessee 9th District. I have to look that up. It's actually Metropolitan Memphis. He has introduced what's known as a joint resolution, which is typically the way an amendment starts. He has about 8 co-sponsors. He actually does have 8 co-sponsors. And he introduced it. Mr. Cohen, I believe, chairs a subcommittee of the overarching Judiciary Committee. And so the idea is that if we as advocates can advocate our members of Congress to sign on to this bill and really clamor for its passage, then that would be that would be the logical way to go. So Joyce, Rosemary, Kaylee, anything else you'd like to add to that I may have omitted?
You omitted nothing. It was perfect, right?
Okay, super. So that's what we as advocates will do, certainly.
I will add one thing. We are encouraging people to keep the conversation going. As you know, the Electoral College comes up all the time, has come up, since the 70s, since who knows how far back. And so right after the election, everybody talks about it and then they forget about it. And it just, and so the league, we've been working on this for a long time too, but now there's more interest, at least in the Electoral College. And so we are taking advantage of that interest. But you need to keep the conversation going. And we have some hurdles. There are people that we will never convince. So we know that. There's some people we'll never convince. And then there's a middle ground of people that we will try to convince, and we hope we will. And then we have a group of people that agree with us, but they think an amendment can't pass. And that's our biggest hurdle. It's like, even our friends, we have to say, well, don't give up. You have to keep trying for an amendment. If you agree with it, write that letter, keep, promoting it. And so that's why we encourage all of you to keep the conversation going, even if it's with someone who is arguing with you. You don't have to get mad at the person, but you can have a little conversation. So I'll tell my Carol. I haven't told you most of my usual stories, but my Carol story, one of my good girlfriends, Carol, came to one of the early presentations, and she brought along her sister-in-law, Diane. And so Diane heard the presentation. And so now it's Christmas at their house, and the whole big Italian family is there. And there's a lull in the conversation. And Diane pipes up, so what do you think of the Electoral College? And and the whole family was like, well, where did that come from? But that's exactly what we're talking about. Keep the conversation going, keep people talking about it, whether they're for it or against it, at least to keep it in the public eye and in the public conversation.
Yes, I think one of our one of our primary areas of work will be to educate people too, and just remind them over and over again. And only 5 times in this country's history has the winner of the presidency gone to the person with the least number of votes, twice within our lifetime. So we have to keep educating over and over again. And just really quickly, I put up there it's House Joint Resolution 14. And you can look that up either on house.gov or govtrack.us. I can put that on the chat as well. So Kaylee, I think a couple other questions or comments came in.
Yep. Kathy asked, numbers wise, if the League of Women Voters of the United States and the National Vote Group join together, how many people do you feel already support abolishment of the Electoral College?
Well, I can jump in on that. I'm not sure this has anything to do with the combination of those two efforts, but in nationwide polling has been going on for a long time. And there has almost always in every poll since they've been doing it, the majority of Americans say they support getting rid of the Electoral College. The most recent one I've seen was done, I believe, right before the last election. So it was around November 4th. And it said 61% of the people polled wanted to abolish the Electoral College.
Gallup poll, correct.
Yes. So it is definitely a majority of people. As Rosemary said, I think what we need to do is clue those people in that this actually can happen. It's not a pie in the sky dream. Constitutional amendments happen. This is a very ripe time for it to happen. So I think in some ways the hurdle is to get people familiar with all of the arguments that Rosemary presented. But another way, it's just to tell them this can actually happen. This can be done, and to start contacting their representatives, reference, bills that come up, and it's something that it won't happen if people don't try. But it is a majority of people.
The next question is from Greg. He has a 2-part question. He's asking how our group is different from other nonprofits working to achieve the same ends. And then he was asking if we've considered other language to appeal to a wider audience.
So thanks, Kaylee, and thanks, Greg, for asking. So I'll go to part 1 first. So how are we any different from other nonprofits? So to the best of our knowledge, and we did do a pretty thorough search of what's out there, to the best of our knowledge, this is the only group whose primary function in life is to end the Electoral College via an amendment. There are other groups, such as the League of Women Voters, other national groups, who also have that as an objective. However, those larger organizations have a broad menu of issue items that they are working on. And so their focus on Electoral College may sometimes get diluted or may get reprioritized depending on what they're working on. There is one other group, at least, that is actually doing that interstate compact that we talked about recently. Their genesis was, I think, in 2000 after the contested election then. So again, we believe that this is our lane, that this is our uniqueness is that we are the only group that's solely dedicated to ending the Electoral College via a constitutional amendment. Now, we have talked amongst ourselves, and we will continue to have this discussion internally as to what other policy areas we would be supportive of. For example, statehood for DC, we would be supportive of that. The interstate compact as an interim workaround to Electoral College, we would be supportive of that as well. So let me look at the second question. Have you considered the language to appeal to a wide swath of the electorate? We are. We know that words are very, very important, Greg. So thank you for reminding us of that. In fact, we have talked about the word abolish, and we may want to abolish the use of the term abolish. In fact, we are now leaning towards using the verb replace, to replace the Electoral College with a direct vote for president and vice president. So yes, Greg, and if you have any ideas, we would encourage you to get in touch with us. I'll tell you all how to do that shortly. So what is the bill number, Kaylee? I think that was the next one, and I think I answered that. And so why don't we go down the list, Kaylee? Go right ahead.
Do that poll at the end, or the concluding poll, or do it now?
Oh, that's right. Yes, Kaylee, why not? Can we get to the questions? I think there's only a few
There's
questions
only one
remaining.
and you kind of answered it. She was asking about if this is an opportunity to bring Guam, Puerto Rico, and Washington, D.C. into into the vote. And that's something we support.
It is something that we support. That is correct. As you know, the Electoral College system only permits electors to vote from the 50 states and the District of Columbia. The 3.5 million residents of Puerto Rico are shut out from that process, as are residents of Guam and the Virgin Islands and so forth. Those guys can vote for primaries, but they cannot vote for a general presidential election. So yes, we do support enfranchising those voters, certainly.
And that's all the questions right now.
Terrific. So yes, now would be a good time, Rosemary. We have a closing question. It's really an open-ended poll question that Rosemary will put on the screen, and it will actually help us at the national vote. It would help us understand what some of your interests are, where some of your priority areas would be. So I'll let Rosemary put that up on the screen and allow a few minutes for you all to react.
And then after that, you'll tell how people can get involved with your new group too.
And
right?
then that'll be my closing statement, and then the hour is up.
Okay. So let me go to poll number 2, and what this is asking is, what were the 3 most compelling reasons to abolish the Electoral College system, in your opinion? And you might have to scroll the poll up because it's long. There are a lot of choices. And you can pick as many as you want. We're asking for 3, but you can indicate less or more if you wish. And it is also anonymous. We have 14 of 18 people have voted. We'll give it a few more seconds. If those last 4 people want to vote, oh, that might be counting us, and we can't vote because we're the co-host. So maybe that's everybody. All right, I will end the poll now. And let's see what the results are. Looks like 36% thought the racist history, 57% had to do with the swing states getting all the attention, 71% had to do with a disincentive to vote, keeping voting down, 57% thought the red and blue was dividing our country, 79% that the person who lost the popular vote did not win. That's the winning answer here of all of them. Mine, it's in 2 colors. 21% had to do with the unequal weight of the states. 57% that both parties can benefit. 2 people had some other reasons, so it might be in the chat. So we look forward to that. And of our group, none of you were not convinced. So I'm very happy about that. I don't know about Alan and Kaylee. So did everyone have enough time to look at it? So thank you. Thank you for
This is very helpful, and it helps us with the products and literature and messaging that we will be undertaking too. It looks like the swing state, non-swing state issue is a major one. I know it certainly is for me. So moving forward, we still have quite a bit of work to do. We've only been meeting for about 2 months now. We're still setting up our website. We do have an email inbox, which is info@thenationalvote.com. If anyone on the line has any expertise, for example, in writing, in marketing, in public speaking, in designing things online for online use, things like that, we would certainly welcome your input and invite you to join our growing team. Otherwise, we are forming a mailing list, and we will keep all people who have expressed an interest and have made contact with us, we will keep them engaged. We will be doing at least monthly e-newsletters to keep folks engaged and to keep them up to speed on what the news of the day is. So again, we invite you wholeheartedly to join our growing movement, or if you have any further questions, if we didn't get to your stuff tonight, we encourage you to send an email to info@thenationalvote.com. So we will keep you apprised of the latest developments. If you want to get put on our mailing list, share this with others who you think will be interested. Share this among your contacts, both physically and in social media land. In fact, we are on some of the major platforms of social media. Thank you, Kaylee, for that. On Facebook, you can go to facebook.com/thenationalvote, and on Twitter, twitter.com/thenationalvote. So with that, any final thoughts from my colleagues, from Kaylee, Joyce, or Rosemary?
Well, I did get a request for how to get the presentation. And so it's on the League of Women Voters of Illinois website under issues. And I just copied the actual, there it is, the actual link. So it's the League of Women Voters of Illinois under issues, Abolish the Electoral College. We have the presentation, the script, and many supportive materials that are free for anybody to use.
That's very good. It's very helpful. And so not only do they get the PowerPoint, but also the associated script. Is that correct?
Correct. And there are other handouts and materials there as well.
Correct. Yes. So the League has done the Illinois chapter of the League has done some quite good work, and that is where the data come from in this presentation. Well, with that, we're a few minutes past, so thank you for staying into overtime with us. I'd like to thank Rosemary Heileman very, very much for taking time out of her Friday evening and sharing this wonderful presentation with us. Yes, a round of applause to you. Thank you. And also thank you, Kaylee, for your support as always. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we look forward to continuing this dialogue, this conversation with you online, and hopefully someday, maybe even in person if we all get vaccinated. So don't forget to wear your mask. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Let's adjourn, and I wish you all a very nice evening and a very good weekend. So long from Maryland.